I'm going to use this video in an attempt to process the Orlando shootings and to talk about some ideas that I've been fermenting for a while. There's a really good likelihood that it could cause some controversy, and I mean, it is what it is because this is basically a structured attempt to just vomit some reason and some sense into this otherwise just catastrophic political cataclysm. But the mass shootings as they relate to Islamic extremism and as they sometimes seem to refer to right-wing extremism within this country, which radical Islam, considering it's a theocracy, is in many ways right-wing. These things are all complex ethical issues, incredibly complex. And people have a tendency to oversimplify the way that they look at them. And you can pick out these types of ethical conundrums in a lot of the world's most difficult problems and conflicts. I'm just going to list them out because for me they're interesting. The Palestinian and Israeli conflict is one that's actually a complex nugget because, as everybody knows, Jews, the Israelites, they were the victims of the Holocaust in World War II, which is probably one of the most powerful generational wrongs that has ever existed because, I mean, it was just such a massive attempt at genocide. On the other hand, though, when the Israeli state was established, there was a lot of land that was reappropriated. I'm not educated enough to say right out like what the ethics were in the appropriation of that land. But if you've got that much land changing hands and you've got such a radical shift of political power in an area, there were some problems for the indigenous people. I feel like that point is almost 100% inarguable. And the Israeli presence there, despite how much they would have intended to help the Palestinians, of course you're going to have just massive resentment in that area as you're basically having this massive population infused. Now, this doesn't justify anything, but it does kind of take a look at why the conflict is so unbelievably volatile and why it's lasted as long as it has. As a generational wrong of a dual layer, it will take several generations for the hurt and for the violence and the anger to subside. There's another generational conflict that goes on here in America. In fact, there's several. That's the relationship between whites, Caucasians, and African Americans, and people of pretty much of every other race. Because the Caucasians have managed to basically just be the supervillains of history. And, you know, I'm not exactly a big proponent of white guilt, but I am a proponent for understanding history and your role in history. And these are things that, if not, this should be paralyzing for you emotionally. It's something that you should grip with and come to terms with emotionally. Caucasians have been the source of so many generational wrongs throughout history. The fact is, when you look around at the minority populations of African Americans in America, so many of them would never have even been here if there was not this gigantic slave trade. And none of their ancestors, well, I mean, there may have been the occasion, I shouldn't use such extremes, but tragically a few of their ancestors would have made the choice to locate here. And so that's again a massive generational wrong that we have basically been contending with. And I honestly believe that racism is very closely connected to these generational wrongs. Not just for the African Americans who are, you know, still fighting to make up the difference of having just this massive economic drawback to their history. The fact that they don't get to draw from, you know, generations of established American family. Just being behind that far makes such a huge difference and, you know, really offsets that balance of power. So, getting back to the Orlando shooting, this is yet again another one of these generational injustices that has carried over into the present day. And when we talk about Islamic conflict with the West, there's not a lot of conversation as to why the chaos and why the anger is there for us. And because it's almost like, trying to empathize with Islamic extremists, it does almost seem monstrous, but it's also an exercise just in critical thinking to try to understand, where is this coming from? And so many people, I'm going to drop a name here even though it's going to cause like all sorts of potential drama. Devon Tracey, who is under the account Atheism is Unstoppable. He is a fascinating guy, but his rhetoric is terrifying, and it very much mirrors what Donald Trump has been saying. Now, Donald Trump has been advocating on what I believe to be a pipe dream, saying that we should either deport Muslims. I don't know if he ever actually said deport Muslims. That might have actually been for Latinos. But to keep Muslims from entering America via immigration, and then, the tight policing of Muslim communities, that violates so many civil rights, and it would be such a nightmare to enforce, and it would only serve to inflame tensions between the West and Islamic countries. Because, again, we're using this massive label on people, on a great amount of people who are following a religion that has a few badly behaved individuals. Now, again, in the case of Islam, there's a little bit more, organization, the fact that they do have the Islamic State, and it has been such a problem. But going back to the idea, again, of a generational wrong, colonists from Europe absolutely devastated Arabic countries, especially in the wake of World War I. Look at the amount of dictators and absolute madmen that were put in place by colonial powers in that aftermath. I mean, Gaddafi, Hussein, then you have, the changing with, what was his name? The Shah, which eventually led to the revolution with the Ayatollah. These people were closely working with the West and kind of in there with the West's condoning. I mean, we had these dictators, we had these ruthless individuals there to keep peace. And there were a lot of atrocities in their wake. Now, to call out Devon Tracey for his rhetoric and for the videos that he makes, it is a little bit unfair, because I don't want to completely undermine his position, because all positions need to be out loud and need to be spoken. But oh man, when you start basically saying that Islam is the problem, when you start saying that everybody who follows Islam is a potential monster, basically, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot of counterpoints for this if he even deems to respond to this video, which he might not, but those lines of argument, that is dehumanizing them. It's dehumanizing them to a point that it's easy to commit atrocities. And he would argue all day long that he's not advocating fascism. But at the end of the day, if you're going to increase the power of the state to regulate who comes in and out of the country, and if you're going to increase the power of the state to perform surveillance, to monitor individuals because of their religion, you're doing something at least halfway fascist, because you are advocating for a much, much more powerful state function than what we have. That is a massive amount of power that you're giving to the state. If you're appealing to a populist sentiment that everybody should be aware of Islam and should be acting against it, discouraging it, mocking it, deriding it, that's an invitation to chaos. I mean, you can't openly deride people because of their faith, especially if they're otherwise, you're going to drive them further to the right-hand side of that spectrum. The argument that I've seen that is most repugnant to me, and I say repugnant to me because, again, trying to give these people as much respect as I possibly can, is this argument that if you support the LGBT community, but you are also, in a way, pro or at least sympathetic to the Islamic community, you're somehow betraying the LGBT community. That is such a monumental misfire. You're trying to equate sympathy with minority groups. And you notice I'm saying sympathy because obviously I'm not here condoning the actions of a right-wing extremist movement. I'm not here condoning Islamic extremism. No, it needs to be fought, right? We need to be kept safe. But you can't extend that blanket to an entire massive chunk population of people, all from different cultures and all with different values and ideas. You're going to make the problem worse with that rhetoric. You're actually going to seed conflict. And again, I know he's going to have a lot of interesting logical arguments against this, like I said, if he even cares, because let's face it, I'm like a lamprey riding on his belly at this point. So I'm trying to give respect where respect is due. But I'm an atheist, but I still try to take a few central truths of spirituality to kind of get at an essential moral truth. For me, that essential moral truth is the Tao. Tao says that the more you struggle and the more you try to manipulate and fix a problem, the more you're going to cause chaos. You cannot directly intervene and solve a problem on a mass scale in any form or fashion. This message actually works for a lot of conservative ideals. It really flies in the face of big government in a lot of ways. Part of the reason why I like it so much, because so much spirituality lends itself to kind of like hippie, ooh, we're all lefties. But to tighten up and to go after people because they ascribe to a religion, you're using an incredibly wide angle lens. You're going to cause more problems than you would ever solve. So, again, I hope I'm important enough to respond to, but we'll see.